Good morning, everyone. We are doing Mishnayos Arla. We are up to the last Mishnah of the Masechta. This is Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah Tes, Mishnah 9. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Rav Yaakov Eliezer. Tzfeik Arla Be'eretz Yisrael Aser. If there is a situation where the fruit in front of you is in doubt whether it is Arla or not. Now we know Arla is the first 3 years of the tree. The fruit is forbidden. And we have a situation here where you're not sure if it's Arla or not. The case that's given here is, for example, if you're buying fruit from a non-Jew and he brought you this and he's selling this fruit from his field. His field has trees that are Arla, trees that are not Arla, and he brings you a basket of fruit. You don't know, are those fruits from the Arla tree or not? So Be'eretz Yisrael Aser. If this takes place in the land of Israel and Eretz Yisrael, it's forbidden. And the reason it's forbidden is because Arla in Eretz Yisrael is forbidden according to Torah law. And we have a rule, Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra, that when there is a doubt regarding a Torah law, we have to be stringent. And therefore, if we have a doubt about these fruits, are they Arla or not? So then we have to, we have to be stringent. Now, Uba Surya Mutter. If you'd be in Syria, which Syria is what was called Aram Tzova, which is roughly the area corresponding to present-day northern Syria, which was conquered by David HaMelech, by King David. According to Torah law, it is not Eretz Yisrael, but rabbinically they gave it many laws like Eretz Yisrael. But once you're in Syria, you're outside of Eretz Yisrael. And although, as we have studied before, and we shall see clearly later on in the Mishnah, although Arla is forbidden outside of Eretz Yisrael, according to Torah law, nonetheless, there is Arla is an exception to the rule of that when we're dealing with a doubt about a Torah prohibition, that we have to be stringent. Arla is the exception. As we're going to see, the reason is because the prohibition of Arla outside of Eretz Yisrael is based on what's called Halach L'Moshe Sinai. It's a law given to Moshe at Sinai, which means to say that everything was given to Moshe at Sinai. Certain laws were written in the Torah or derived from the Torah, from the words of the Torah, while there were a certain group of laws that were just given to Moshe orally with no actual source in the Torah for it. That's called Halach L'Moshe Sinai, the law given to Moshe at Sinai. Just the law given from God to Moshe. It's not written in the Torah in any form. That is a Torah prohibition. This tradition of this law that Moshe Rabbeinu received, this law from Sinai, came with a provision that although it's a Torah prohibition, if there's a suffix, if there's a doubt about it, we can be lenient. And therefore, we say that in Syria, it's going to be permissible. This situation where he has that fruit, and he brought that fruit, and he has this basket of fruit, we don't know where is it from. Is Arla trees or not? In Syria, it is permitted to partake from it. Okay. Now, however, even in Syria, we're talking about that he brought the fruit out from his field. You cannot buy as long as we do not buy it from a field that is known to, Right. We have to know if you're gonna buy this fruit in Syria, but from this non-Jew who has Arla trees in his field and non-Arla trees, we can only buy it from a field that is known to contain, that is, as long as we do not buy it from a field that is known to contain some Arla trees. That's a provision about this. Even when we're talking about this leniency that by Syria we're not going to treat it as strict as we would in Eretz Yisrael. That's only going to hold true if we don't know we don't know that this field has Arla trees in it. Basically, what that means is, right, we don't know that there are Arla trees in it. If he brings you the fruit, you don't know, is it from Arla or not? Okay, maybe there's no Arla. If it's a situation where we don't know that there are Arla trees in this non-Jewish field, maybe there are, but we don't know that there are, then although such a situation in Eretz Yisrael we'd have to be strict about, in Syria we don't have to be strict about that. Okay, so in Eretz Yisrael, maybe if its field possibly contains Arla trees, which is a good chance that they do, we have to be strict. If we're talking about Syria, as long as we don't know that there are the trees in his field, we can be lenient. That's the leniency that the sages allowed in Syria. Again, in Syria, as we're going to see, if you go outside of Syria, the leniency is going to be even greater. Syria, which we do treat like Eretz Yisrael, although we don't treat it with the full power of a Torah prohibition, but we're going to be more strict there than, let's say, in other places outside of Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah continues of a chutzah la'aretz, and if you're outside of the land, it means you're outside of Israel, you're outside of Syria. Yoyred v'lo keach. That means you can go into his field and buy. Ubelvad shelo yir'enu lo keid, as long as you don't see him collecting. Meaning, if you in the first two cases, you're not going to get to his field. You're basically he has fruits out of his field. He's selling you the fruits. You don't know where they're coming from. In this situation, you're in his field. So you're closer to the problem, so to speak. And although, so we allow you to go ahead and go down to his field and buy fruit from his field, buy fruit from him in his field. Again, it's fruit that's already picked, and you're in the field with him. So the chances of it being from coming to the field are very great. But as long as you don't see him picking it, means as long as you can have a possibility that he brought these fruits from outside of his field, meaning they're not Arla fruits. They're from somewhere else. They're from a place that doesn't have Arla. As long as it's possible that you didn't see him collecting it from this field, he maybe brought it from a different field that doesn't have Arla, then you're going to be able to buy even in the field itself. That's what this part of the Mishna is saying. Since it's not clear that the fruit came from the Arla trees, may buy and eat it. And the point here is, just want to sort of clarify something here. Right. The point is that when you are in Chutz La'aretz and you're in his field, we want to make sure that, again, if you were to see him picking it from this field, then the sages were strict. They wouldn't allow you to buy it. And again, these are all stringencies that sages made because they don't want they don't want it to lead to people buying from a non-Jew from his field when clearly right. Since it might lead people to buy fruit from a non-Jew, even when it was clearly from an Arla tree, therefore they didn't just go ahead and allow you to buy from even outside of Eretz Yisrael from the non-Jew's field when you see picking it from there. If you're allowed to go ahead and buy fruit from a non-Jew from what he picked from his field, we're afraid people might lead for people to go ahead and allow that to be done. People will come to allow that to be done, even if, let's say, the tree is an Arla tree. So we can't let you go ahead and actually buy from what you see him picking, because again, it can lead to people being lenient in that, even in a case where it is Arla. We can only allow that if it's already picked, which again means that there is a slight possibility. There is a possibility, meaning you don't know. Maybe he got this from outside of this field. Then already the sages said that we'll be lenient in Chutz La'aretz to allow you to buy the fruit in the field itself. So it gets a little bit tricky here. There is definitely leniencies, a greater leniency when it comes to outside of Eretz Yisrael and outside of Syria, but at the same time, the sages didn't just allow it to happen in carte blanche. They wanted to make sure that, again, people don't think that it's okay to buy from this non-Jews field, and they think it's going to be okay even when there is certain Arla, and therefore they only allowed you to buy when you didn't see him pick it. You may be in the field, which means that chances are pretty great that this fruit does come from this field. Nonetheless, as long as you didn't see him pick it, so there is the possibility that he didn't get it from here. All this is created, and again, to make sure that people don't become lenient and buy when they're not supposed to buy. So we allowed you to buy in the field as long as there's something there that allows us to say the possibility didn't come from this field. That's going to be enough as a reminder for people to realize things here aren't regular and to realize that they can't just go buying from here whenever they want. Okay, so that's the law by Arla. So again, by Arla, the Mishnah says if it's a questionable case of Arla in Eretz Yisrael, you have to be stringent. It's forbidden. In Syria, if in Syria it's going to be permitted, and again, it's going to be permitted if it was already picked and it's outside of the field. In Chutz La'aretz, you can even buy it. They can go into his field and buy it as long as they didn't see him collect. Next case, Kerem Natua Yerek. If you have a vineyard that was planted with vegetables, which is Kiliyah Kerem, you cannot plant vegetables inside a vineyard. That's the mixture of the vineyard. Everything's forbidden. The Yarak Nimkar Chutzalai. Now, outside the vineyard, you have someone selling vegetables. Okay. Outside the vineyard, there are vegetables being sold. So here the doubt is, did these vegetables come from the vineyard, which would make them forbidden, or maybe they came from somewhere else? That's our question. The vegetables being sold outside of the vineyard, we know that there are vegetables in this vineyard that are forbidden. The question is, the vegetables that are being sold, are they from the vineyard and therefore forbidden? Are they from outside of the vineyard? Eretz Yisrael Asar. Again, in Eretz Yisrael, it is forbidden to eat them. You have to be stringent. It's a question, it's a doubt regarding a Torah prohibition. Or Surya Mutter. If you are in Syria, it is going to be permissible. You can buy it. Okay. Being that in Syria, this is a rabbinic prohibition, it can be lenient and it's permissible. If you're outside of the land, you can ask the person, the non-Jew, to go down into that field and get vegetables for you, even though they may be Kiliyah Kerem. In Chutz La'aretz, you can tell them to go down and collect. Provided that the Jew does not do the picking himself. That he cannot do. Now, what's going on here exactly? You're allowing the non-Jew to go into the field, but we know that in the field there's kalayim. So what's going on? How can we allow him to go pick it? We know there's kalayim there. So the Mishnah is discussing a case where there are vegetables in or near this vineyard that are not prohibited as Kiliyah Kerem. Therefore, since it's possible that the non-Jew will give him permitted vegetables, he's allowed to ask him to go gather for him. Okay, so here's the case. The case of the Mishnah here is that, yes, this field is kalayim. This field, the vegetables are forbidden. But we know that there are vegetables near the field. We know that there are vegetables, or we know that there are vegetables in or near the vineyard that are not Kiliyah Kerem. We know that. We know that some vegetables in this field were planted as kalayim, and some of them were not planted as kalayim. And therefore, in this case, we can tell a non-Jew to go down into the field and ask him to gather the vegetables for us, because although we know there is kalayim vegetables in this field, nonetheless, we also know that there are kalayim vegetables in the field. There are vegetables in the field that are not kalayim, or nearby that are not kalayim, and therefore, since we have the possibility to say that the non-Jew picked it from there, so when we have that kind of a doubt, then the halacha is that we can be lenient because we're outside of Israel and outside of Syria. But the Mishnah says, but the Jew himself cannot go do the collecting, because if he's doing the collecting, he's going to see, are the vegetables near the vines or not? He's going to see what's forbidden and what's not forbidden. So he can't just go into the field and collect. However, the Jew may not pick the vegetables himself, since he can see which vegetables are prohibited. Similarly, here we the notes, if he sees a non-Jew pick vegetables that are definitely kilei kerem, he may not take them. Meaning you can't, if you know that it is kilayim, either because you yourself went ahead and even though you yourself went ahead and collected this, or you knew that what the guy picked from was kilayim, that's of course going to be forbidden. It's only in a situation that, although again, you're telling him to go to the field. In the field, there is kilayim. There are vegetables that are forbidden. But since you know that there are vegetables there that are nearby that aren't forbidden, we can be lenient in this case of kilei kerem. Now, what's pointed out by the Mefarshim, by the commentaries, is that there's a clear difference between Arla and kilei kerem. In the case of Arla, in kilei kerem, we said you can tell him to go down and collect. In the case of Arla, number one, we said even in Surya, you got to make sure it can't be that you know that there's Arla there. Here, we're saying we know that there is kilei kerem there, and we can still tell the guy to go down and collect, which by Arla, in Chutz La'aretz, you can go into the field, but you can't know that he collected from there. And here, we know that he collected from there. We're telling him to go down and collect. So we're being more lenient when it comes to kilei kerem than to Arla. And the reason is because when you're dealing with Arla is forbidden. If it's certain Arla, then it's forbidden from the Torah outside of Eretz Yisrael. Kalayim, on the other hand, the halacha is that because definite Kalayim even when we don't have definite Kalayim right. Definite Kalayim outside of Eretz Yisrael is only midrabanan, it's only rabbinic in nature, and therefore we can be more lenient there. Okay. So in the case of Arla, we cannot ask the non-Jew to gather from that field that there's Arla. We can only buy what was already picked. That's what the Mishna said. Kilei kerem, on the other hand, we can actually tell him to go ahead into the field and do it because of the fact that, again, we can be more lenient by kilei kerem, since even definite kilei kerem is only rabbinic in nature, while Arla, that's definite outside of Eretz Yisrael, is a Torah prohibition. Now the Mishnah concludes, Hachadash asar min haTorah b'chol makom. Chadash, new grain, is forbidden from the Torah everywhere. Meaning, new grain means, the Torah actually tells us that any new grain that grows before the second day of Pesach, which is when the Omer offering is brought, it's forbidden. And once you bring the Omer on the second day, that new grain, meaning that grew before Pesach, is going to be, it now becomes permissible because you brought the Omer carbon. When there is no Omer, now, that's the prohibition. This Tana says that Chadash, although again, it's what's called a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz, it's a mitzvah that's dependent, that has to do with the land itself. And typically that only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Chadash, according to the opinion of this Tana, based on wording of the Torah, learns that it's asur, forbidden, even outside of Eretz Yisrael. So now, if it means it's even forbidden outside of Eretz Yisrael, then that's going to mean that even now the truth is that's number one, it's forbidden everywhere. And number two, it's important to know that when you don't have a Beis Hamikdash, you don't have the Omer carbon anymore to offer to permit it. Then the Torah tells us, then we derive from the Torah that once the second day of Pesach passes, everything becomes permissible. So when there's a Beis Hamikdash, you need the Omer Safra. That was a barley meal offering to permit the new grain. Without the Beis Hamikdash, it's the second day. It's completion of. It's going through the second day of Pesach. Once you've gone through the second day of Pesach, it all becomes permissible. And according to the opinion of this Mishnah, Chadash will be forbidden both in Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. Happens to be a machlokes tonight. It happens to be an argument amongst the sages of the Mishnah. Arla, when we talk about the prohibition of Arla, the first 3 years of the tree being forbidden, halacha. That means, as we explained before, it's forbidden, according to Torah law, outside of Eretz Yisrael, from the source of that is halacha Moshe Sinai, a law given to Moshe at Sinai. Kilayim, when it comes to the prohibition of kilayim, and here we're talking about the prohibition of when you plant grain or vegetables together next to a vine, that's midivrei seifrim. That is rabbinically prohibited. Okay, now that's rabbinically prohibited outside of Eretz Yisrael. So that's the conclusion of the Mishnah, and it's telling us that when it comes to these three mitzvahs, we say that Chadash is a Torah prohibition everywhere. Orla is a Torah prohibition everywhere based on Allah Moshe Sinai. Kilayim is also everywhere. In Eretz Yisrael, it's a Torah law. In Chutz La'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's a rabbinic law. Now, the Bartanura points out something important to know. However, they did not prohibit kilayim of seeds, planting different kinds of vegetables and grains together. There's a prohibition of planting kilei zeroyim. That means when you have different vegetables or grains, and to plant them together is forbidden to do in Eretz Yisrael. That prohibition does not exist outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the reason is, since this kind of kalayim is not prohibited for benefit or even to eat in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to plant these things. You're not allowed to plant these different vegetables together. But if you do, they're permissible. You can eat them, you can benefit from them. And therefore, being that the prohibition in Eretz Yisrael isn't that strict, therefore, they did not extend the prohibition into outside of Eretz Yisrael. But then, grafting different species of trees together is biblically prohibited even outside of Eretz Yisrael. So that's some interesting laws to know when it comes to these agricultural actions. Okay, so we have now completed Mishnah Yis Arla. Tomorrow, B'ez Hashem, we start the Masechta, the Tractate of Bikurim, which is the final Masechta, the final section of the order of Zroyim. The Mishnah is divided into 6 orders. The first order is called Zroyim, which means seeds, which deals with agricultural laws, as we've been involved with. And we're about to start, B'ez Hashem, the last order, the last part of this section of the Mishnah called Zroyim. When we do that, typically we have a siyum, we have a celebration in honor of that. That may be a little bit hard to do in the kind of situation we're in right now, but it's definitely something very exciting to anticipate. I've got to do the laws of Lashon Harah. Chilas. Klal Vav, chapter 6, Sif Ches, paragraph 8. Dinis Rekabalas Rechilas, this law that it's forbidden to accept the Rechilas you hear, to believe it. This is even from someone who's been innocently speaking. What that means is, the person who told you this had no intention to try to get you angry at your friend. It came out. He just said it. There was no intention. It wasn't like trying to let you know this. He just said it as a fact. And there's certain circumstances, and regarding different laws, that does carry some weight to give a truth, but not when it comes to the laws of Rechilas. And all the other details about this we've learned already previously in the first section that dealt with the laws of Lashon. Have a wonderful day.